let's go straight into section 1 this week in Bitcoin. So as I hinted at in the intro, Coinbase made an announcement. Full disclosure, I was a very early investor in Coinbase before it went public. The private equity through Bank to the Future, as many other investors were as well, that went through the platform. But Coinbase came out and said that the SEC has dropped the case and likely it will be confirmed next week. Now, we know that this was all part of the Operation Choke Point 2.0, and we know where it came from. And it is very important that we audit the Fed. And we even saw in the Senate hearing with Jerome Powell, him switching his narrative away from banks should be able to work with crypto after very, very aggressively saying that you don't even want to look at this area, to also semi-admitting that there was a coordinated attack on our industry through Operation Choke Point 2.0, which we know led to the loss of billions of dollars through implants and unnatural strategies that tied into both the crypto side, the macro side, and the geopolitical side as well. Anyway, it came from the Fed at the top. We haven't got the confirmation yet, but audit the Fed and we shall find out. And it came down through the banking lobby, through the Elizabeth Warrens of the world, that are shills that are paid for her political campaigning by the banking lobby in order to do the bidding, not of America, but for the banks, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. And then it came down through the SEC and Gary Gensler, who is now fired, that is meant to be protecting consumers, but is actually protecting lobby interest from those that are actually, at best, bribing, blackmailing, paying, or they are just bad agents in the first place. When you follow the money, you get the truth, and you don't need to follow for anything. Anyway, there was an attempted controlled demolition of our industry in 2022. As our industry was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we had these scams like Celsius and FTX that had implants like Mijinski and SBF that were then controlled, demolished, which led to the loss of billions of dollars of creditors or, innocent victims' money. And that was weaponized and used. And you can go back through the narrative of the Fed when they said inflation is transitory by pushing down rates. And then suddenly hiking rates, which led to the destruction of the bond market, or a well-functioning bond market. And that led to rates that caused issues in the banks. The banks that were needed to be a part, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve, were given FDIC loans, and the ones they wanted to take out, like Signature, Silicon Valley Bank, and Silvergate, that was serving our industry, they were goodbye FDIC takeover, give us all your money. Gangster, Gestapo took over the banks and said, you are now mine, controlled demolition. And if you don't play ball, we'll make you JP Morgan. And JP Morgan is the shareholder of the Federal Reserve and one of the architects of the Federal Reserve System that is killing middle-class America through inflation and redistributing all of your taxpayer and your money that is being printed to fund wars and the proof of weapons network to being pushing up the share price of those that benefit at the expense of the everyday American, until eventually the US dollar proof of weapons network no longer works, which causes civil unrest. And we are seeing record levels of suicides right now, record levels of mental illnesses, record levels of everything that's destructive in society, because that is how a debt-based fiat currency Ponzi scheme works. So you need to resist. Life is about making sure that you can beat the proof of weapons network if you are to survive. And you do that by peaceful resistance that Satoshi Nakamoto gave to us in 2008. They could not beat us, so they tried to take us down. And they used the SEC, the Federal Reserve, and the weapons of the apparatus, even to go as far as the Biden administration trying to go to Saudi Arabia to negotiate lower oil prices, and ended up with higher oil prices so that Russia and America could wipe out Europe and take out the banks that they needed to on the way. We'll be going more and more through that as we go through the flow of money and everything that lead to this. And I'm not saying everything's planned. Things go wrong, but you can see the forces that are at work, and it's dead simple. to see through the propaganda once you follow the money and understand the flows. Well, they wanted to hand over our industry to BlackRock and the globalist large financial institutions, which are the controllers of global finance, not the ones that have an America First agenda, the ones that have a global agenda. They don't mind working with China. They don't mind working with Saudi Arabia. They don't mind working with Russia. They don't mind working with Europe, South America, Central America, Africa, but they're certainly not America First, and yet they control America because they control the lobby, and you can buy the government using campaign financing across America. Well, anyway, they wanted to hand over the industry to those that control the global financial system, and suddenly the SEC says, Bitcoin ETF approved, BlackRock. And no, banks can't use this, but the ones that are the shareholders in the Federal Reserve that can custody through Bank of New York Mellon, you're approved to do the custody. And Coinbase, we are going to take you down. SEC is going to sue you and make sure you are down. They countersued, they lost, and full credit where credit is due. Throughout this whole show, I've always talked about how the Trump administration was the vote because fix the money, fix the world, despite the fact he's definitely not a neocon, but he has to play the Zionist game, which we'll cover in the geopolitical section, which is what is standing in the way of America having the monetary reform that it needs in order to use stablecoin regulations and Bitcoin strategic reserves to take on the Fed after the audit. And it's exposed what is happening with the gold in America in the Fort Knox audit. All to come. We will make sure we cover it every single week. But Coinbase fought back. BlackRock got what they wanted, but Coinbase essentially, through the change in administration, through the lobbying efforts of the crypto lobby, and through the fact that they could not beat us, so they joined us. And so they ended up figuring out how to own as much Bitcoin as possible and setting up the tools that they need in order to remove the apparatus of the traditional financial banking and hand it all over to the technocrats as well. But fortunately, Satoshi Nakamoto saw this one coming, and it was designed through proof of work whereby whoever owns it cannot control it. And even if you get control of mining, you still got node operators, and you have this beautiful, elegant design that has now become geopolitically neutral, apolitical money that can see through any type of country agenda, because if you can't beat them, you have to join them. And that is not just for America. That is the same for every country in the world. It didn't work. We won. And as long as you have your Bitcoin in self-custody, then you can beat the system, and a peaceful resistance against the shenanigans of crony capitalism and those that control the global finance proof of weapons network that need more and more war in order to sell their fiat currency and make sure it comes back into the military contractors that back up the violent fiat currency proof of weapons network, as was designed by the Bank of England, handed over to the Federal Reserve, and through the Bank for International Settlements, perpetuated across 157 countries, while the IMF and the economic hitmen overthrew country and country and got them into debt slavery in order to ensure that they were there to prop up the dollar and create the environment that we are in today, that we are retreating from. More on that in the macro section. But we need to audit the SEC. We need to show we've got the model that was already done through USAID. And then at the right time, get your stablecoin regulations, get your Bitcoin strategic reserves, decide with your market structuring, which regulator, whether these are securities or not, how you're going to engage. And then at the right time, you can do a controlled demolition on the Federal Reserve, should you choose, if they use such tactics again, which they will. And that is why you got to get the timing right. The model has been set. We saw what happened with USAID. We saw what happened with the National Endowment of Democracy. You flood the market just like WikiLeaks used to. You tell the truth, and then you decide strategically at the right moment that you do a controlled demolition of the apparatus of the proof of weapons network, which was exposing, as was done with USAID, exposing the colored revolutions, the human trafficking operations that taxpayers are paying for, the drug cartels, all of the things that we know Elizabeth Warren was saying is Bitcoin, when we know that it's the banking cartels that actually allow that, and it's the fiat currency proof of weapons network. And in fact, it is systemically designed in order to prop up the crimes against humanity of the fiat currency debt-based Ponzi scheme, where there is more interest every time a deposit is created when a bank issues a loan. The controllers of the digital currency called the pound, the euro, the dollar, and everything else. Anyway, remember the model. We learned it from USAID. Controlled demolition through radical transparency, and then you can have retreat. And that's exactly what I think we are doing. But the lesson is you should not be holding your Bitcoin in Bitcoin ETFs unless there is a very strong reason, and it's part of a hedging strategy. The reason for that is because we saw today, live as we speak, the largest custodial exchange hack that we have ever seen in the history of our industry. Today, $1.4 billion worth of ETH and staked ETH was hacked from the Bybit exchange. Why? Bybit has to hold large deposits in order to allow you to leverage, because they allow you to short Bitcoin, engage in financial speculation, do the 100x leverage, all of the old tricks of the fiat currency proof of weapons network that are designed to part you from your Bitcoin. And although this is ETH, and we'll go, we'll dig deeper into that, but this is, have this as your lesson. Self-custody is the way. And if you are going to custody, you don't do it with an exchange. You do it with a custodian that's subject to audit and is not using vast amounts of that in order to create leverage structured products and futures and everything, and lending that Bitcoin and doing all the shenanigans that can lead to these types of scenarios as well. Anyway, the funds had begun today out of Bybit, $1.4 billion. The addresses are all being tracked, and you can't even do anything with that. They're selling it. They're putting it through Tornado Cash. They're obfuscating the addresses right now. So far, they have sold $200 million worth of staked ETH, and I'm really surprised the price has actually sustained itself. It shows you the sheer level of liquidity. Back in the day, this would have been like an 80% correction in Bitcoin, even though it had nothing to do with Bitcoin. But those were the beautiful days when you could buy Bitcoin on the cheap because something like this would happen. But the liquidity is all being sucked up. Expect some kind of volatility, but this might create the buying opportunity because we had some good news with the SEC retreating, and then immediately we get these controlled demolition of exchanges. The reason they are doing controlled demolition of exchanges is because they want to fool you into selling your Bitcoin so that those on the other side of the hack can accumulate it, as the proof of weapons network is designed to trick you into fooling you into thinking your Bitcoin is worth selling. Anyway, this is the biggest hack we've ever seen in the industry, and it's also a testament to how far we've come. Meanwhile, the European Central Bank proof of weapons network that gives its private bank shareholders the ability to create the euro every time they issue a loan is looking at how it can hold on, because traditionally the European Central Bank, a part of the apparatus, has been a Fed-first central bank. It has killed Europe. It has driven Europe into decline. We'll cover more of that in the macro section. But as the European Central Bank is destroying Europe by making it go into a Fed-first policy, which is propping up the euro dollar so that countries don't have Bitcoin strategic reserves, and they are bowing down to the almighty European Central Bank, which is driving bad policy and making sure that it props up the dollar for the Fed, a Fed-first institution. The Europeans are starting to realize there is nothing working here. And of course, the European Central Bank is set up for a controlled demolition, because all it is needing to do is hold on and extract as much out of the European people that are being tricked through the euro in order to take those funds from you. Now, what are they going to do to bail out the system? Well, of course, if it's being prepped for a controlled demolition, they're getting ready for their central bank digital currency. So they made an announcement today. They are going to be launching their blockchain-based payment system, which is a slow creep towards their central bank digital currency vision, which is the vision of all of these central banks in the end, which is to fully take away, so that when you have a controlled demolition of the shareholders and the banks, you can either transition to a stablecoin based system with the technocratic artificial intelligence running it, or you can continue, if the country falls for it, to have a central bank digital currency. And of course, they will be hedging both sides of that, and you protect yourself through peaceful proof of work, Bitcoin, and you don't fall for the shenanigans of the fiat currency proof of weapons network. Anyway, we're meant to be progressing towards Bitcoin, but the installed leadership across Europe is playing full into the warmongering mission that was set up by the CIA when it drove America basically wage war on Europe through this proxy war that they call a Ukraine-Russian war, that was designed in order to completely control, demolish the European people. And it worked like a treat. America won, but there is the New World Order meeting being set up that we can go through and understand how to get ahead of this so that you don't get fooled by it. Now, remember, we could have those countries deciding to fight against the European Central Bank by building their own Bitcoin strategic reserves, but they have to be honest, just like we're experiencing in America when the controlled demolition was happening, when there is a retreat to a regional superpower rather than a global superpower, when the apparatus is being set up to hedge against the exposure of the debt-based Ponzi scheme fiat currency proof of weapons network. When that is being set up, you need to set up the alternative and be ready for it. That is the combination of Bitcoin strategic reserves, and we are moving more and more into the innovation on Lightning Network, which is allowing for stable coins to exist on Bitcoin Lightning as well. So we are transferring over to a potential environment of peace if the Bitcoin strategic reserves are built up for countries and they are able to transition peacefully. If they double down on their central bank, then they will be going through the path of violence, which will lead to more war, death, and destruction. Monetary reform is needed. It can be done evolutionary or it can be done revolutionary. The reason America retreated is because we were about to enter into World War III, and they knew that China was going to sit on the side and everyone else was going to blow each other up. The economies of the world were going to be destroyed, and China would have won just like America won during World War I and World War II, because they sat on the side while everyone else was blowing each other up. So now we need to make sure that we are focusing on the Bitcoin side on getting Lightning Network adoption. We've been waiting a long time. It is slowly growing. But now that we are having beta tests of USDT, Tether, stablecoins, and it doesn't have to be Tether, it could be someone else, it could be decentralized, it could be all sorts of things. But the beta test of having the ability to send stablecoins on the Lightning Network where people can lock up their Bitcoin in a decentralized way, this is a massive progress, and we must, and I will, be investing more into making sure that this area progresses at a faster pace. To give you context, if you look at stable coins last year in 2024, just for example, take the volume of stable coins, which you know, USDT and the other ones, in December and January alone, they did $1.4 trillion in volume. If you wanted to annualize that across the entire year, that is $8.4 trillion in transactions. Now, what is the issue with that? Scalability has always been why we needed to create the layer one chain, which is Bitcoin. We needed to get that right. We needed to make sure that the node operators could run nodes so that they can back up cheap copies of the entire blockchain, so that if there is excess control with the miners, then there is that user-activated soft fork resistance against the miners, as we saw during the block war debate when the miners tried to collude to increase the block size. We had that user-activated soft fork, and we transitioned and kept the chain the way it should be by optimizing decentralization rather than going for the easy option of cheaper fees but more centralization. So The new stablecoin regulation, stablecoin volume has basically been, kind of hindered due to and it's always gone to other chains other than Bitcoin because they have lower fees. So you can come and create a cheaper, faster, better, but less decentralized network without the massive expense of the security of proof of work. And you can come along and say, well, you can send your stable coins cheaper because they're centralized anyway. And that is what's happened. So a lot of it moved across to Ethereum, and then it moved across to other chains because it was optimizing for cheap transaction fees. That advantage disappears. And we have privacy enhancing when we open channels on the Lightning Network through layer 2. I don't want to get too geeky into the technicals. If you're interested in this, please do start investigating it. But if you have stable coins on top of Lightning, you get the privacy enhancements, and you get this you don't need to move to these more centralized chains to get cheaper fees, because this was designed to open channels and have significantly cheaper. This could be the killer app for layer 2 Lightning adoption on Bitcoin, and could lay the foundation for countries that want to build a Bitcoin standard and have their own fiat currencies built on top by opening Lightning channels. The apparatus is being set up for the countries that want to do this. And the opportunity for the countries that front run and build their Bitcoin strategic reserves. El Salvador is the one that's doing it in the most responsible way. The Kingdom of Bhutan, did it took on a lot more. And we are seeing other regions. We're seeing states across America. America has to get this through their legal system. They need stablecoin regulations. They need market, who's regulating who. And they then need their Bitcoin strategic reserves. It is a race, and there will be other countries doing this as well. It is the perfect setup for the way that the BRICS currency was designed as well. And so we need to make sure that we can handle all of this, and we still have a lot more to build, which is why none of this is factored into the current price already. Those that have been buying Bitcoin.
We lost you for about 40 seconds, but we're back.
Okay. So imagine if Bitcoin gets its share of the stablecoin volume. So let's just do some estimates. Bitcoin currently has 60% of the network. That, Bitcoin dominance is the statistic. 40% of the network is the rest of the crypto industry. 60% is approximately Bitcoin. That fluctuates. But if Bitcoin were able to get its 60% share of the stable coins, because it had the private channels, it was able to get the network effect. It also has the cheaper fees as well through Lightning Network. You could see an extra $5.1 trillion going through the Bitcoin Lightning Network. And that is the type of adoption that is needed in order to bootstrap this and make it ready for a country that wants to transition to a Bitcoin standard. We have, Suriname in South America. Maya, who I interviewed on BitcoinHardTalk, she's looking to become the next Bitcoin president that actually builds the whole system on open source using this technology. We could have that beta test, which could be used. And so Bitcoin on-chain settlements in 2024 was approximately $19 trillion. So at a $5.1 trillion increase, if you could get stable coins on top of Lightning, on top of Bitcoin, this could be a 27% jump in transactions settled. And you get the benefits of Lightning privacy on top of Bitcoin. And you get the transaction volume, to be able to handle some of these, compete with these payment networks. And then we can have the model that Bitcoin can promise to achieve as we progress through this as well. Okay. So anyway, all in all, if you do the maths, we'd end up with approximately 1,197% increase in adoption of transactions on the Lightning Network, which means that those that wanted to open their channels that can be provided through rewards for providing liquidity can lock up their Bitcoin in the network and end up receiving rewards for providing liquidity to this new financial system that can emerge. Anyway, I've instructed the Bank to the Future team to start looking into investments we can make and how we can support liquidity into such things as well. So if you are a member of Bank to the Future, then look out for announcements into the future, because we want to make sure that we can support that increase in liquidity and also benefit from stable coins on top of the Bitcoin Lightning Network, and see what the yield opportunities are there as well for locking up Bitcoin in a decentralized way as well. Anyway, it's the tools that countries need to fully adopt Bitcoin with stables and private transactions. And the countries that get this right will be the ones that have the potential for it to be the freedom-orientated currencies that want to attract the most amount of volume, the most amount of liquidity, and it will be an opportunity for countries to use Bitcoin as this bottom-up movement in order to support the growth and fight back against the occupation of their central banks if they are being overthrown through current revolutions and everything that the proof of weapons network in the US dollar is exposing to us all at the moment as we move to this transparency as well. This will be great for countries that were victimized most by the fiat currency proof of weapon network. Imagine Syria rebuilding on top of a Bitcoin standard. Imagine Libya doing the same, the one that was destroyed by covert operations in America. Syria destroyed by covert operations from the Federal Reserve proof of weapons network. Imagine if that was done in Sudan, in Palestine, even in Ukraine, El Salvador, Zimbabwe, Argentina, the victims of the International Monetary Fund, the financial gangsters, the economic hitmen that decided to wipe out everybody's savings in order to prop up the dollar-based demand system so they could never use their resources. If we are moving towards a retreat of the economic hitmen of the IMF, in dismantling the petrodollar and the eurodollar, which is what I'm speculating in the macro section is happening right now, all those countries, if it has the right leadership, can rebuild based upon a Bitcoin standard. And it can be done bottom up, and it can be done evolutionary rather than violent revolutions as well. Speaking of Argentina, Milei. You got scammed. And you scammed other people. What can I say? You're going to have legal issues for a long time. What a disaster. So Milei could have, if he chose, he could have been right at the root of this bottom-up revolution that would have been so good for all the Argentinians, that have been so destroyed by the International Monetary Fund and the economic hitmen and the financial weapons of mass destruction and the wokest movement towards welfare and sociology and socialism that was inflicted upon them in order to get them into debt perpetuity, to steal their resources, to take all of their oil resources and their gold. And Milei could have been the one that could have delivered that. He could have triggered international adoption of Bitcoin by following the Bitcoin strategic reserve strategy, by listening to El Salvador and Bukele that led the what's possible here. This could have created a massive position of influence, a massive industry, a massive bottom-up movement, an era that breaks 1,000 years of, oppression through fiat currency proof of weapons network, even ushered in sound money for the next 1,000 years. And Argentina could have been, and still can be if they choose, at the center of that. Instead, he sat down with the wrong person that he met at a shitcoin casino conference and decided in 60 minutes to pull off a shitcoin, meme coin rug pull that he got fooled into because Trump gave the green light of launching his own meme coin, and he thought that he could replicate the same thing. And instead, now the reputation is tarnished, the peso crashed, the Argentinian stock market crashed, all because this shows why centralization is a problem. This is why we Bitcoin. This is why we have the proof of work network, because we don't need to trust these leaders. It doesn't matter who Satoshi is. Satoshi handed over the project in 2010. None of it matters. And the idiot Peter Schiff that I was debating, I'll upload that to YouTube. Remember to get that uploaded to YouTube. Was saying, but who is Satoshi? We need to know who Satoshi is. He wants a CEO that can be assassinated or can engage in the shitcoin casino and launch meme coins. Satoshi gave us a gift by walking away and leaving the project decentralized as it is. Anyway, what did Milei do? He handed over all of his, or a big chunk of Argentina's gold over Co. in London at the same time when the Bank of England is not even able to fulfill demand for gold, as we are having a repatriation of gold, while the Fort Knox is being audited because you can't trust custodians, and the Bank of England is probably next on the chopper if Elon Musk can successfully pull off a regime change in the UK to get all of the data from the UK government to hand it over to the artificial intelligence that is needed to power his stablecoin using the social credit score that will be built upon X. If he successfully does that, then Milei handed over a chunk of the gold over to the UK. It's not easy. It's not even easy to repatriate that. The Bank of England's not even delivering at the moment. And he hands it over to Rothschild in London. And at the same time, he rugged his own people with a meme coin, all in the name of supporting Argentina. So if you didn't see the story, there was massive lawsuits that are now being used and weaponized through lawfare, through political, enemies, as well as the genuine victims that bought this shitcoin. And obviously he came out and said, if you play in the shitcoin casino, you deserve everything you got, which is true. Hopefully you'll be learning your lesson and you'll not be, gambling in this industry and having no Bitcoin at the end of it. But through Trump's legacy of launching meme coins and sucking out all the volume that we covered in previous, a grifter was able to sit down with President Milei, buy through the crypto lobby a meeting, and make him think that this is a good idea. So now Milei has joined in the club with his new shitcoin. I don't even want to mention it, but I got to mention it. Please do not engage in these things. Libra, which is interesting. The same name as the one that was launched by Facebook. Which ended up with the proof of weapons network having a hissy fit to stop Libra or Facebook launching their stablecoin as well. Anyway, he marketed his meme coin and he said on his X account that this is to support Argentina. He received millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars from those that were fans worldwide. I'm not sure how many were Argentinians that were on the wrong side of the proof of weapons network thinking this is a good investment versus the majority that were probably speculating. And the market cap launched immediately over $4 billion, manipulated by the same people that created the token, that was holding all the funds, and now has all the funds that this sniper sniped out and dumped on everybody in order to crash the coin by 97% immediately or shortly after Milei tweeted and got as many people into this pump and dump scam as possible. Of course, the first thing he did was delete his tweet. And now he comes out and expects everybody to just move on and pretend that it never happened immediately afterwards. Then what happened? He put out another tweet and came back for another pump and dump, which led to the same snipers or different snipers rugging more money out of the victims as well, or the gamblers, whatever you want to call them, and did a second snipe. And shortly afterwards, after the tweets were deleted and the second snipe was done, a gentleman, or let's call a sniper, called Hayden Davis, that managed to engineer this whole thing in the first place, came out and put in his video saying that he has over $100 million that he sniped and does not know what to do because he's sat there with this money, and Milei and the team are pretending that they're nothing to do with it, and then had to later come out and admit it, and did basically what Sam Bankman-Fried, if you remember, when we were on X Spaces and SBF came up and said, I don't know what happened to all the money. I don't know what happened. And we started asking him questions about how the engine works and the market making and the connections between Alameda and FTX. And then he ended up confessing to the worst types of things that you could do on video through CoffeeZilla's YouTube channel as well. So literally, this guy is in serious trouble as well. Hayden basically was the sniper and then admitted to doing the exact same on the First Lady, President Trump's wife's coin, Melania, which rugged and did a snipe and got out and did an 89% correction. And he was behind that. So now he connected it to everything that happened with the president of the United States, and then even reveals that insiders in the Trump token got into the meme coin at a pre-launch dinner at a $500 million market cap that went up to approximately an $80 billion market cap, while there was sniping all the way up, that was happening at a private meeting at a crypto board dinner that was being promoted, right before President Trump came in. I think it was the 20th of January, was it? Wow, things have moved so fast. Anyway, right. So full disclosure, having went through the drama of this, I don't think Milei made any money out of it personally. We can never tell. You don't know what's really happening behind the scenes. But immediately Milei come out after confessing, saying, sorry, he launched an investigation into Libra. And that's when the hostage videos came out where Hayden was saying, I don't know what to do. I need Milei to reply and the team to reply. That immediately followed by Argentina lawyers filing fraud claims and criminal claims against Milei for promoting a crypto rug pull. And now anyone that is a victim of that is going to be caught in a horrific process because they want to refund the money. But you can't refund the money without going through, what we went through, the type of process that happened with Celsius and happened with FTX, where you have to go into a bankruptcy in order to protect yourself from the lawsuits. The lawyers start spending all the money, and then you go in a process of those that were refunded, that were unfairly, the crypto influencers that were refunded, they have to have clawbacks, and then you dollarize the claim, and then you distribute it fairly. And then you've got cross-jurisdictional arbitration, political campaign financing, corruptions, assassinations, everything that could be involved, political interference, a lesson to anybody. And, so many times, do not be fooled into these meme coins. Stay away from it. It is not worth your entire reputation in order to scam some money just because you missed Bitcoin. Do it the honest way, because Bitcoin is the opportunity that everyone can participate in. And immediately this led to a bit of a correction in the peso, a crash of the Argentinian stock market. It's time to redeem yourself, Milei. You are stuck in this mess. You got fooled by this grifter, but bring the gold home, demonstrate, expose the Bank of England, expose Rothschild, expose the Proof of Weapons Network, stop dollarizing and doing the bidding of the Federal Reserve, adopt Bitcoin as a strategic Bitcoin reserve for the Argentinian people, make Bitcoin legal tender, and eventually you can start supporting Lightning Network for your current country to structure some kind of stablecoin payment system built upon Lightning Network. And you can redeem yourself and be a part of this historical moment of fighting back against the International Monetary Fund. Bukele did it. He's continuing to do it. But he didn't do it fast enough. So he didn't end up with enough Bitcoin. He's only got his 6,000 or Bitcoin, which meant that the IMF could engage in political interference in order to set the terms Now you can continue through that. Fortunately, some of that money that the IMF sent over to El Salvador ended up in an increased purchase of Bitcoin. But if Bukele had enough Bitcoin and did it faster, he would have been able to restructure, launch the Bitcoin bonds, and continue the good mission of telling the Bank of England, telling the International Monetary Fund, telling the Federal Reserve and the US Congress, F you, we're going to be a sovereign nation and we're going to build our Bitcoin strategic reserves. Abu Dhabi came out and said and disclosed that their sovereign wealth fund has $436 million of Bitcoin ETF held in custody in America, when the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi, if it wanted, could learn from the El Salvador strategy. It's a start. It's okay. Now we know that the Bitcoin ETFs are applying for in-kind redemption so that you can go directly from Bitcoin to Bitcoin ETF and vice versa. And that can be done by some of these sovereign wealth funds as they progress to remain sovereign. You never know when the proof of weapons network is going to be negotiated against you. Now, fortunately, I do believe that Abu Dhabi has positioned itself on the right side of the New World Order that is going to be negotiated very shortly, that we'll cover in both the macro section. But anyway, Europe needs to catch up. Europe is on the complete wrong side of this. Australia came out and said we could use political campaign and we could do what Trump did. We could get the crypto vote, and there is enough of a community within Australia in order to swing the vote over to the opposing party by using crypto and having Trump or pro-crypto Bitcoin policies. So Australia, you make sure that your money goes with the, we can swing all these different votes and get the right type of leadership that's needed so that eventually we can transition and get rid of the neocon warlords that support the central banking proof of weapons network, an evolutionary transition rather than waiting for a war-led revolution. So the crypto lobby is building up in Australia. I think the crypto voting bloc is meant to be approximately 2 million people or 2 million users. So make sure that in your country, as we go that, remember Germany's next. And Germany is going vastly down authoritarianism as it turned off its nuclear, as it got destroyed by the American-led operation to blow up Nord Stream pipeline, to remove its manufacturing base, as it went further and further to the left and sacrificed its economy into recession by going through the Fed first policy of the European Central Bank. Meanwhile, more and more traditional financial institutions are starting to protect themselves. $725 billion asset manager Bernstein says that the US government, rather than having to print dollars in order to purchase Bitcoin, can simply revalue its gold, sell some of its gold and its gold reserves to purchase Bitcoin. This can be done at the right strategic moment after auditing Fort Knox, determining that the Fed hasn't stolen all of America's gold and that it is there, and then structuring it after a Bitcoin strategic reserve, stablecoin regulations, and determining who the regulator is and getting away from FDIC and OCC, and hopefully putting in players that are actually America first as we move through this retreat in a de-dollarization world that we'll be going through in the macro section. At the same time, the New York Stock Exchange filed a proposed solution to allow for staking of Grayscale's Ethereum ETF. Remember the PSYOP. Those that control the stake in proof of stake have a voting in the governance of the network. So Grayscale will become a significant player in determining the future, which is why Ethereum is most likely to be used as a tokenized network for real world assets as this progresses. And those who the ETF providers, if they can get approval for staking, they can create the semi-control network that's needed as you have this two-tiered Ethereum system, DeFi in self-custody and ETFs in custody that control the stake. Bitcoin did not go for that design. Even though BlackRock tried to do that when they had their ESG narrative and they supported Ethereum to try and pressure Bitcoin to transitioning proof of work to proof of stake. But because Bitcoin is not controlled by any lobbying group or any controller or any large pre-mined token holder, they could not control it. So they ended up having to just own some and settle for benefiting from it rather than controlling it. Anyway, remember, for those that want to maintain control of the stake, where it's legally held in your name in custody, rather than you having a share or paper version of ETH, at Bank to the Future, we allow people to do that. So you don't create a not tax advice, but you don't create a taxable event by exchanging one security for another security. You just simply rent a validator, and then you can take those weekly rewards from ETH staking as this network hedges. You can hedge against whatever's happening in Bitcoin in case all of the real world assets ends up on Ethereum. And you can even convert your stake into Bitcoin, or you could choose to do it in US dollars. And then you can invest that in shares of Bitcoin companies as you can go through all that, and as Bitcoin Lightning stablecoins progress, we'll make sure to share those opportunities with our investors as we rebuild, and everybody can join in this new financial system that is shaping up week by week that we'll be covering, and we always cover on Bitcoin Hard Talk as well. What else happened? Well, the proof of weapons network, after their controlled demolition, they're all coming in. We had a message from the largest custodian in the world, State Street and Citibank, one of the largest shareholders in the Federal Reserve, that they're going to be launching their crypto custody service. And then obviously they'll do their Ethereum service. And then obviously they'll apply to be able to stake it so that they can tokenize their real world assets and have a say in the future of the governance of that network. At the same time, the remnants of the Operation Choke Point 2.0, like the controlled demolition from FTX, the victims of that, they started receiving some of their payments. And thankfully, one of the companies we invested in and funded in the seed round, and other investors at Bank to the Future, Kraken, one of the largest exchanges that are looking to go public later this year so more people can participate. At Bank to the Future, you're able to buy private equity pre-IPO in Kraken as well. But they were distributing all the payments. Those payments came in, my understanding, because in the bankruptcy, just like we may see in the Milei case with this meme coin, whatever happens there, they tend to use the proof of weapons network to dollarize your claim, to confuse you into thinking that you're whole, so that if the price of Bitcoin goes up, they can say you're whole in dollar terms, even though you got wrecked in Bitcoin terms. But they distributed in dollars, and now those dollars can be easily converted into Bitcoin through the Kraken exchange, producing more buy volume, which may be a reason why we have a $1.4 billion hack, and yet the price doesn't seem to be too affected. Let me just check out what's happening, because this is all happening in real time. Only 2% down on Ethereum after the worst hack, 1.4% down on Bitcoin. Absolutely remarkable, the amount of liquidity. That back in the day would have been wild. This is a reflection of where our market is and where we're headed as well. Right, a few more on the Bitcoin side before we start going into the macro side. Elon Musk Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, announced an audit of the SEC for fraud, for abuse, and for waste. And so this is the controlled demolition model. You put in the new leadership, you get rid of the old, you expose it, and then we can move forward, wipe the slate scene, set the new regulations, because America hopefully is getting ready to hedge itself from the proof of weapons network as it starts to take away more of this war-led economy and retreat to America first, which is what we're witnessing right before our eyes. Now, there is obviously the technocracy side that I've covered as AI becomes the data play, but we are exchanging one incredibly horrible evil that is leading to death to a data-driven world. And quite frankly, We have to just prepare ourselves through the change and make sure that we have as much peaceful proof of work, Bitcoin in self-custody to resist everything that is happening. So let's call this Operation Choke Point 3.0. Let's choke the Fed. Let's choke the SEC. Let's expose it. Let's go to transparency. And let's expose the financial institutions so that more and more people can recognize that this was a controlled demolition psyop and learn the importance of self-custody so that you're not subjected to the whims of those that are controlling through global finances forces. Is it time to reopen the FTX file as well? Remember, there was all the Democrat Party political bribery. Remember, SBF parents right now are trying to campaign to get a presidential pardon. Remember, the judge decided not to investigate all of the bribery that was happening through FTX and how funds were being flown into Ukraine. Now we know what we know about Ukraine in order to pay influencers in order to fool you into thinking that you're fighting for democracy, when really this was all about selling more weapons, violence, death, destruction, sacrificing Ukrainian people for a proxy war where US waged war on Europe in order to detract it from actually aligning with BRICS. We'll cover more on that. But remember, time to open up the FTX files, because the corrupt Biden administration that has been paid by the corruption of the military-industrial complex swept aside those criminal investigations. Of course, they revealed the bribing that happened in China, but they didn't reveal the democratic stuff. So why don't we reopen that file for the FTX side as well? Let's open that again. Elon Musk also came out and said that US politicians that received any kickbacks from taxpayer funds that were sent to Ukraine, those need to be audited and those need to be exposed as well. Microsoft, in a very important announcement before we go into the macro section as well, there was announcements in terms of quantum chips. I think they called it Majorana 1. And so there is an important strand or subset of Bitcoin improvement proposals to make sure that we are ready for quantum resistant cryptography. I think this is going to become a more and more important thing. We've learned how these forks work within Bitcoin world. When it is needed, they get consensus. But this is also a systemic issue, not just to Bitcoin, but to everything. Because these SHA-256 cryptography, which is used in order to basically getting ahead of it, is that quantum resistant cryptography is something that needs to be prepared for, is Bitcoin transitions. That is not a reason not to buy Bitcoin, as some people will say, because the solutions already exist. We will do the fork at the right time, but the community needs to be more aggressive with those Bitcoin improvement proposals and buckle up. Welcome. If you weren't involved in the hard fork debate, you'll see how this works and how Bitcoin actually designed itself so that there is no political corruption, there is no centralized decision making, and the players are held into check with each other. But at some stage, as we go further and further down the quantum route, we're going to have quantum resistant cryptography, which is something that globally the banking system, central banking system, national security, NSA, the apparatus of everything relies upon this. So it will be a global challenge together as we progress to this next phase as well. Anyway, I just wanted to say that because you'll probably get a lot of people fudding you don't buy Bitcoin because of this. I'm getting more and more people asking me questions about it. And I know the community will always be on it. It is, one of these things that we need to resolve. And when the time is right, it will happen. And that is everything that I've got you for this week in Bitcoin. We now move over to part 2, where we're going to be going through this week in macro. Now, if you enjoyed the Bitcoin section, we got a lot more to go through. We're going to be going through the New World Order 2025 meeting that I believe is happening very shortly and is being laid the framework, but we're going to follow the money so that you don't fool the media and you don't get caught up in all the propaganda, and you know how to position yourself as we transition to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Now, I need a favor from you right now. If everybody watching